Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. I'm Robbie.
I'm Jason.
And welcome to the table. Excited to be here for another episode, and we're talking about a good one today. One that is, I think, quickly climbing in our household as a personal favorite, and I think beloved amongst the community. Would you say, Jason?
Yeah, for sure. It is not going to get on too many people's all-time favorite list, but it's a game that people are like, oh yeah, I like that game. It's a fun game. There's enough things to it that people really like the game.
Yeah. Well, we're coming at you on the backside, behind the scenes, as Jason and I will be together next week, which it's been a minute since it's funny because it feels like it's been a really long time. And then you look at a calendar and you're like, okay, it's been like this normal amount of time.
Right.
Like it's
3 months,
it totally
3 months,
makes sense.
less than 3 months. Yeah. But it was the longest. I don't know if I even said this on the last episode, but it was the longest you and I had gone without actually talking since we became friends through Foundation, because since we've done the podcast, at least, because you and I talk every 2 weeks at least. Yeah. Now we texted often during that time when you could, between taking care of Leo, but I was like, told Raz, wow, that's really. I just realized I hadn't actually talked to Robbie in a while until last week. Well, spoiler, Robbie was getting to the point where we're actually recording this back to back weeks, but this will drop next week. So when this drops, the previous Tuesday is when we're recording this.
Yeah. It's going to be a good time. I'm excited to be up there, play some games. But Jason, what games have you been playing lately?
I played 2 games on Saturday with my boys, each of my boys, Xander and Ryder. So I've gotten Xander. I don't know if we talked about it. So we played, this is not the game we're talking about, but a few weeks ago we played Duel from Middle Earth, which is Seven Wonders Duel, essentially, but better. And I realized Xander loves Lord of the Rings, so we played that, and it was a big hit because I played it, and I just continue to realize 2-person dueling type games just aren't me and Elizabeth's jam. It's an amazing game. Seven Wonders Duel is amazing, but what I realized what I like about Seven Wonders Duel is the drafting aspect. And so Duel from Middle Earth, if you like Lord of the Rings and a board gamer, it's fantastic. Xander knows enough board games that he's just fine with it. He just doesn't really like it. But I get reminded when I was teaching him the rules of that he just picked it up really quick. I'm like, I did raise him as a board gamer, so, and he's a video gamer, so he's already a problem solver. It's not the game I'm talking about, but Duels from Middle Earth, fantastic. If you like Lord of the Rings, you like Seven Wonders Duel, amazing. So Xander came over and played that, and I gave it to him. I said, hey, I'm going to get rid of this game. And I told him about he wanted it. So I said, now that I think about it, when we were playing that game, I said, there's this Undaunted series that's a 2-person deck building tactical game. There's a whole series of it. And so we played Undaunted Normandy. There's Undaunted North Africa, Undaunted Stroganoff, Undaunted Reinforcements. 2-person dueling in that you play 2 sides. Like in Undaunted Normandy, you're playing the Germans and the Americans. And you have a set of cards, and you have, I think in the game, there's 12 objectives, 12 different campaigns or scenarios where you lay out the tiles differently and lay out the objectives. And you have different, basic characters you get to use, whether they're riflemen or mortarmen or machine gunnist or whatever. And essentially the gist of it is you start with, it tells you which cards to have, and you have your own, like a deck building game, you have your own stack of cards you buy from. You only buy from your set of cards, and then you start with 10 or 12 cards, you draw them, and you play them all. The gist of it is there's like with any deck building game, there's rules for what you can play on there, but your moving characters, your scouting characters, your controlling spaces on the board. It's very much a very mini war game. 2-person war game that for those who like tactical kind of games, playing your way through that, it's pretty awesome. And the cards have multi-use cards because you could have move 2 or scout 1 or control or whatever. And when you play that card, you're only using it for that one effect. It also has really cool cards that fill your deck called Fog of War. All military people understand the concept of fog of war. It's a very common discussion. We talk about military tactics and strategy, and those cards get into your deck and they do nothing, right? They just fill your deck. One of the coolest things about Undaunted series is that at the beginning of your turn, you each draw up. Okay, I have my 4 cards. I think it's 4 cards, and you flip over a card for initiative. The cards are numbered 1 through 9 in the top left, and the only thing that's for is initiative, which basically means who's going to go first this round. And so you may want to, your higher numbered cards are your stronger guys, but if you play that card for initiative, you can't play it as a card that round. You're basically using that card, say, oh, I want to go first so much, I'm going to give up this really good card to now play the rest. but all Fog of War cards are 1. So if you're okay with going second, you now have more cards in your hand. I think now I haven't played with Lindsay enough to know if she likes 2-person, dueling games, but I think you would love the Undaunted series because it's a tactical thinking your way around a board, not super crunchy, but it's a tactical game which you're playing cards to move these little pieces around the board to do things. Some dice chucking because you got to have some chance with when you shoot. You'd have to, it is what that level of dice roll, and my dice rolls were terrible and Xander's were great, but that was okay. Like, I don't really mind that much in that game. So Undaunted series, pretty awesome. I gave him Undaunted Normandy. Ryder really loves Undaunted North Africa. I'm keeping, but it's really going to be Riders, but it adds a plane, or it adds like a tank and a truck in it, and you can have characters in it. Super cool Undaunted series. And they're also like the guy who created it is an Air Force civilian, which is coincidence, who's a big historian. And so they're influenced by real battles in history. The 12 scenarios they give you in the game aren't perfect reproductions, but they're influenced by certain objectives that happened during World War II. So that was the first game I played. I see why people love it. I'm constantly reminded why 2-person dueling games, even no matter how many times I try them, they're just not for me. The second game we played is the beast of a game. The box is right here. You can see how big that box is. It's literally the tallest box I got, called Andromeda's Edge. It's a sequel to Dwellings of Elderville, same developer. Heavy, big Euro games, the best way to describe it. In space, you're exploring space, creating new spaceships. There's some combat, but it's not terrible combat. It's dice rolling, but it has some fun mechanisms in there with dice rolling. But there's just so many things. Ryder came over Saturday night because Liz was out of town this past weekend. And so, including the teach, learning the game took us about 2.5 hours for 2 people. But even if Ryder and I sat and played it now knowing it still would take at least an hour and a half, if not close to 2 hours, because there's so many things. And we played a shortened game. You can choose a 50-pointer, 60-pointer, or 70-pointer, which means it kicks off the last round of the game based on your point track. Other than saying, it's hard. It's worker placement at its heart. You're basically putting out ships to spaces, and on those spaces, you may be able to take an action there. And if you're near other people, combat may ensue. Combat's very deterministic. Well, it's not deterministic, but it's very dice rolling. But there are other cards you can do to enable yourself to have better chances at winning. The cool thing about Andromeda's Edge is that when you return to your home base, your hangar, you did get to do actions as well. And that's where a lot of the extra fun actions come, because you're buying cards as the game goes to put on your home base. And when you pull your ship off here and you come back to your main base, you get to do something cool. And so that's a lot of the fun is the engine. You're basically building an engine with your modules, they're called. But you got to kind of work out, hey, I need to come here, which may let me do this. And this one brings here, let me do this. Let me do here and do this. I didn't back it on Kickstarter. It's a big hit right now. Like, it's on a lot of people's top list from last year. I didn't back it on Kickstarter because I knew it was very expensive. And I was like, I'm going to roll the dice and see if I can get it essentially the same game for cheaper. And I did. I was able to pre-order it through like Game Nerds months ago, and then bought the upgrade kit with it as well. So I have these amazing minis. I think I shot a photo of Andromeda's Edge when I played it. It has these insane minis. Now the upgrade kit alone was like $100. The game's like $50 because there's so much plastic. We can't play it on this trip because your trip's so short, but it's one that I think there's just so much going on. Andromeda's Edge is being beloved by so many people. It's close to the top 100 already in BGG, but it's going to move up there very fast because heavy Euro, lots of stuff to do, amazing production. Even the base production, the art's amazing. It's just all standees instead of plastic. But I knew I really wanted all the cool plastic. So Andromeda's Edge.
I love it. I was actually watching last night, just get to consume a lot of content in the wee hours of the morning. And so Dice Tower put out their like recap blog of the cruise. Yeah. And I was chuckling because you mentioned Seven Wonders Duel Middle Earth. And like that game shows up like, I mean, it had to be at least 10 times during that video. It's already in the top 40 of BGG 100. Like, that's how it's crazy. Well, because Seven Wonders Duel was already there. It's almost a perfect game. Seven Wonders Duel is. Then you take a wildly popular IP and make it a little bit better.
Because instead of having the green track where you're just trying to get tokens, instead of having the soldier track where you're pulling back and forth, you're now trying to control areas of Middle Earth, these 7 regions with your soldiers. And then also, you're making alliances with the 7 races. And so it kind of it changes up the way the green tiles work, but it gives you better bonuses and you have a little more agency in those things. So you take almost a perfect game and make it better. It's wild.
Gotta love it.
Yep.
Gotta love it. Speaking of an almost perfect game, my first game that we played, no.
I see your show notes.
So, my brother, since we have a little, a misborn, text message between me, my oldest brother, and Jason, and John sends us a text about like a villainous meme. And for any of you that have ever played the game, it's by Ravensburger, Disney Villainous. The art is incredible. You get to play as the Disney villains, which I'm absolutely here for. They're each play like separate, so they have their own objectives. It's a very unique experience. It's definitely a game I think you can be a lifer on, just because, I mean, you could play it actually like 14 times in a row, and it's a different play experience every single time.
Yep.
So John sent us this like meme of these people playing it, and like a pretty iconic joke in that game of like, oh, I'm about to win, or I have a fate action, because the only way that you interact with other players is you fate them, and there's like a separate deck that you draw from and play into. And how it usually goes is it introduces the idea of king making, which is something that we've talked about in a show, like an episode before. But essentially just when the group has to decide who's going to win based on blocking everyone else. And so this is where like this whole discussion comes down of like, who's closest to winning? That's who I'm going to attack. And then everyone's like trying to basically beg for their lives of like, don't do it to me. That person's also going to win. And then another character just sneaks in and wins it all. So got to play as, I saw it and it reminded me, I love that game so much just because I think the characters are really cool. That is one you talk about spending $100 on an upgrade kit. If you told me I could get like metal figurines of all of them, I wouldn't even blink.
I wouldn't either, and I don't really like the game. I mean, I do like the game, but I would as well. That's how amazing the art is. Sorry, but I agree.
Yeah, and the figurines. I mean, the figurines are amazing, and so I played as Scar because I'm always reminded. Like, I love Scar. He's my favorite villain, and I just like always forget how easy his objective is. Like, it seems, and that's where one thing that I really appreciate about Villainous is that the games, like certain villains probably have like this balance level across them. There are some that are just significantly easier than others, but then there are just villains that you're going to play as that you're like, I somehow just understand how to balance my like fates and all of this really well, and how I like to play the game works out for this. So like, I like to challenge and eliminate the allies and things that end up on the board, and Scar leans into that wholeheartedly. So just reminded how enjoyable Scar is. And then my second game, and so Villainous, stand by, love that game. One day we'll cover Villainous here because I think it's definitely a must cover. The interesting part's going to be the expansions really do make it. But I think the original's like 4 to 6 now that they've rechanged the original or the base box. We'll figure out how to tackle that. But the other one that I had listed, I'm going to pivot and I'm going to say, and this sounds so cheesy, but it's the biggest board game experience I've had lately is Lorcana. And the reason I bring this up is Jason introduced me to Lorcana, talks about it when we started this podcast. In June of last year, my wife and I went on a trip. We bought Lorcana decks, and we were actually talking about it last night. We were like, wow, if we had never gone to San Diego, I don't know that Lorcana like hits our table as soon as it did. And so this past week, I got to play in set championships, which are the idea, Jason, is that these set championships are like Ravensburger, who makes the game, sends out these kits to your local game stores, and they have these like promo cards in them that if you get in the top 8 of everyone playing in the tournament, you get this promo card.
Okay.
And the promo cards can sell anywhere from like $30 for a cheap one to, depending on what the card is, they'll be like 75 to 100.
Yeah.
And so the prizing, and if you come in first or second, you get a play mat that is that art as well.
Okay.
And the mats sell as well. And so I was like, okay, I'd love to go like play in a tournament. I had played in a tournament the last set, and got into top 8, got my promo. It was fine. But this set, the promo materials were all Scar. And I was like, okay, I got to lean in. I got to buckle up. And so that has been my like, Leo goes to bed, or I have like an online version that I play. And so like, I will literally have Leo like sleeping in my arms, and I'm just clicking around, testing my deck, doing stuff like that. So went and played 2 set championships, and I'm proud to say that I walked away with a top 8 Scar for both of them. So
nice.
Feeling good.
Very cool.
The phrases that I'll use for the people who are familiar with Lorcana: I play green, steel, discard. People hated me when I showed up. That's fine. I don't care. Someone's got to be the villain. I guess it's me. Yeah. And so I played my deck, had a great time. And the last tournament actually came into the top 8 as first seed after Swiss and everything, which felt great. I went on an undefeated run. It was awesome. So
that's awesome, man. Yeah. And that's even more reason why, collectible card games, living card games, trading card games are just not for me. But one of my favorite things, I see the appeal, right? I see working through your deck, figuring out your deck, going through all those things. And it's cool. I mean, the art on that, talking about art, the art on there is cool. The things those cards do are amazing. And when you do that massive combo, I'm sure it's fun. 2 things. One is, Villainous, we definitely have to do one day. We've talked about it. Whenever we go deeper, like there's all kinds of issues I have with it, but I own everything for Villainous. It's sitting over here. I have 3, 6, 9, 14 things. I think I've bought almost everything Villainous you can buy, because that's how much I love it, right? Just for a game I dislike, I buy everything for it. So anyway, glad to hear that about Lorcana. A game, and this is on my mind, Veil of Eternity is a board game that's like a card game, living card game, that's like a board game. I'm just throwing it out there as a pin. Yeah. We need to figure that one out at some time, because people who say, I don't want to get into the card game world, but I get to do card game type stuff, truly in what I hope Lorcana would be, but what it became naturally is what Veil of Eternity is. Like, it just has some decks in it. You go in there and you go from there. So congrats, man. That's awesome to go. I'm sure you were excited to go in hoping to get the top 8 because of Scar, and then get in the top 8. That's awesome. Yeah.
It definitely made the, hey, and like this is where we talk about, like, if you're like gamer, you're listening to this, there are certain games where you're like, I would love to play Andromeda's Edge, and it's like, okay, can I commit to sitting down for 2 to 3 hours to play this game? Like, that's a time commitment. And these tournaments, it was like, Jason and I got to one of them at 1 o'clock, or no, the longest one, I got there at 11 and I got home at 7 p.m. Because you play X amount of rounds, and each round is at least 50 minutes. And so it's a slog for playing card games all day, going through. And so it was nice to be able to come home and be like, oh, I spent the whole day away from my family. But at least I got this card, I guess.
Priorities.
But we're not here to just talk about those things. We're here to talk about a fantastic game called New York Zoo. Jason, you want to tell us a little bit about New York Zoo?
Absolutely. Robbie mentioned it actually last week on our previous episode about games he likes to introduce. It's a good one to do that. We're going to go deep dive today. Released in 2020. For some reason, I thought this was an older game. I have no logical reason why I thought it was an older game. It just feels like it's an older game, but not in a bad way, in a really good way. Designed by Uwe Rosenberg. What's unique about Uwe Rosenberg, hardcore gamers know that name hands down, because he did Agricola, one of my all-time favorite games. He did Feast for Odin, Caverna, other Polyomino games, but he also did Patchwork, which we've already covered on this game. And there's very similarities, which we'll discuss when we talk about it, between Patchwork and New York Zoo. But Uwe likes his Polyomino games. We talk about Polyomino as Tetris-style pieces, right? You'll hear say Polyomino multiple times, but multiple cubes, they have different shapes that fit together like a puzzle. Published by Furlan, Spiel, and Capstone Games. It's 1 to 5 players, plays in 30 to 60 minutes, which is fairly accurate. Depending on the player depending on your players and whatnot, it's fairly accurate. It can be a quite quick game, for sure. And I'm playing a ton on BGA, which that'll come through when we talk about a little bit more. In New York Zoo, you're constructing a zoo via building animal enclosures, the polyomino pieces I referenced earlier, introducing new animals, gathering new animals, and then raising their offspring, i.e. those animals are going to breed, and you're going to have more baby penguins, baby flamingos, those types of things. It's fairly straightforward game. You literally take one of two actions. That's it. You either take a polyomino piece from a board that has basically spaces that go around in a circle, and you're taking a polyomino piece based on where the starting player piece is at, and you place it on your board. Or you take animals into a storage set on your player mat. That's it. There's some nuances to how you do all those things, but that's it. You're either going to take a piece from the board and play it, and to be able to do that, you got to have animals, or you take animals. And that's it. That's the only two actions you take. Love games that have two total actions. Way deeper level of strategy, but only two total actions, kind of like Calico. Calico, you play a piece, and then you draw a piece, and that's all you do, right? I mean, but wildly crunchy, this is very similar in that way. So, the cool thing is the first person to completely fill all the spaces on their player board wins the game. That's it. No scoring, no strategizing. Well, this is going to give me 3 points. This is going to be 4 points. It's the first person to completely fill their space automatically wins the game. Full stop. Very cool. That is a very quick high level overview in New York Zoo. Take a piece, put it in your board, and put an animal in there that you already have on your board, or take animals to put on your board. That's the game. The first person to fill out their own player board, because you have your own player board you're playing with, wins the game.
Yeah. So set up and teach for this, like Jason mentioned, it almost couldn't be easier for a game that has depth to it. And I would say that it may not be, it's not in Drama's Edge, right, but it definitely has depth to it in terms of how you're going to play it. Like, I don't think that this is something that you're like, I mentioned this I introduced new gamers to this because I do think that if you want to take it at a base level, very simple. There are two actions. You do those two things and you just have fun. Yep. Build a fun puzzle sitting there on your board. And if you want to go complexity with it, min-maxing your turns and min-maxing how you're doing things can really stack up quickly. So for the gamers, it has some depth to it, which I think is really, really cool. So when you're setting this up, I think one of the most unique parts about the setup that I actually think is really cool, because when you first sit down and look at the game, I would say the cognitive load is not super high,
right?
Because you're just seeing a bunch of pieces all around, and you may look at like, wow, that's a lot of spots, or a lot of pieces, but they're all in piles. So you're wondering like, okay, am I just going to take a pile? Anything like that. I think the weirdest part in setting it up when you're watching it as a gamer is that, so these polyomino pieces are enclosures that are going to go in your zoo as you set it up. So you all have this like map, and the first player map, their board is like 1 or 2 squares larger. Yep. I want to say, like it just a slightest bit different. And so as you go through, there's these polyomino pieces that have different shades of grass surrounding the piece. And the reason that is important is because when you set up the board, you're going to stack. It's like dark green is going to go in these spaces. And then on top of the dark green is a lighter green, and then a lighter green and a lighter green. And so as you go through, the randomization of it is, it doesn't tell you which dark green piece goes there. It just says a dark green piece goes there. So from the setup standpoint, I think it's going to take you a second. If you're remotely colorblind, that's going to be a tough go right off the bat. I'm sure there are some marks or something what I discovered, on it that like the notes.
It's hard on the board where it tells you where it is. It's hard. Now the different shapes, color have different numbers on them as well. So it is like not numbers, like one is 4 squares. One is, it took me numerous plays to realize the biggest ones are all 6 and the next ones are 5. And the next ones are 4. I think it's how they get around color blindness, because it's really hard not being colorblind. We have messed it up. But now that I know it's number based, I'm like, oh, okay, good.
Yeah. Oh, this needs a 5. This needs a 5. Yep. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yep. And so when you're setting it up, I think the first time you watch someone set it up, you're like, oh, it's super easy. You just like grab 4 pieces, put them in this section, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and you spread it around. And then after you do it the first time, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, fairly straightforward. And then the teach is, like Jason has mentioned, I've taught this game now in 3 different play settings, and I actually think it's taken me less than 15 minutes
for sure
every single time.
For sure. Even for you're right. When you think about the actual cognitive load of this is very small. Now, if you just struggle with the concept of puzzling things together, that's not cognitive load. That's a natural skill set, right? Or not. And that's not critiquing somebody who doesn't have it, because we understand how squares go into squares, because there is no restriction to this. Most polyomino games you play, the first one you play after it has to go on the edge of the board, and after that, everything else has to touch it. This one, you can play anywhere on your board. And it's like that is a mind-blowing concept. It seems like it makes sense for board gamers. That's not a common thing that you can just play anywhere on your board, right? And so the cognitive load really is, I can put this piece anywhere as long as it doesn't go outside the edges or overlap. Okay, that's not hard. And then I can just take these animals to play for fun. To your point, right? Just take away the strategy and then play for the fun. Is like, okay, when I put a piece down, I have to have an animal in a house. I pull it from here and I put it there. If I have two animals, when we pass the breeding thing, I get to get another animal, right? That's where the load comes in for if you play it just for fun. But I agree, the teach can be super quick for the basics of the game. But then there are some nuanced things that it's easy to miss with how you can place animals and save animals, and you get bonus breedings based on the number of players you have. The biggest one we missed for the first few times we played, that if you play with 3 players or less, if you breed, you can breed one more enclosure. And so we didn't realize that. And we were just, one of the times we played, like, oh, wait a minute, what is this thing right here? And like, okay, it doesn't necessarily make sense. And so, when we're talking about breeding, when Robbie talked about laying out those pieces, there's essentially a very interesting player board that has cutouts that you lay these multiple polyomino pieces on it. And you have an elephant piece that you can, based on player count, move 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 spaces away. Those spaces are either the stack of tiles where you take the top tile and you put on your board, or it's a little space to have 2 animals. I think there's 5 or 6 animals in the game. And so there's 5, penguins and flamingos and kangaroos and dogs or wolves.
Yeah.
And then prairie dogs or meerkats or something. And so you can go to those spots and take those animals. When you take those animals, you put them right on you have these little storage places on your board. But some of the nuances when you place when you bring an animal in to your board, you also can bring in, if you take an animal from the track, you can also bring an animal from your house into your spot as well. So it's easy to forget that. And then when you breed, you can leave an animal in the house. So there's little bitty nuances that start adding up. And so when we played with Dakota and Marissa, it wasn't their fault, because there's all these little bitty things you don't think about that we do. Like, okay, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? I was, oh yeah, I already forgot I could do that. I already forgot to do that. That's where that load comes in when you go into the deeper level of, okay, what you can and can't do and can easily miss.
Yeah, and I think in the setup and teach, that's where, if you're playing this game, if you're teaching this game, you can decide how much of, because I wouldn't describe it as quarterbacking,
right?
But I would describe it as like courteous checking, to where for the first quarter of the game, doing exactly what Jason's saying, of like, all right, I'm going to pass here,
right?
Which means meerkats breed. Awesome. So then everyone you place your piece, and then the meerkats start breeding. And because I feel like the breeding is where it gets the most complicated, which makes sense. Right. That is kind of the whole draw. So it's not just Tetris, like single player Tetris doing your thing. So as the breeding becomes complicated, you can very much help drive that, and not saying, oh, like, Dakota, have you considered breeding into this one and this one, because it would then finish the enclosure, which would then allow you to do this. Like, you don't do that, but you're like, and just a reminder, like, you can breed 2 different meerkat habitats. Like, however you want to. I think those gentle reminders are a great way, no matter what game you're playing. You've got to find the balance as the teacher to say, this is me, like, over explaining what to do versus putting my table at an extreme disadvantage, because I understand how to do all these things, and that they're going to get to the end of the game and be like, oh, well, Jason just like wiped the floor with us, because it felt like he was doing 8 things when in reality you were, but they also could have been doing the 8 things.
Right. For sure. And you hit the nail on the head that there's a way to do friendly reminders, check-ins. Check-ins is a good way to say that. Just checking in with a friendly reminder, as opposed to, we know it's more optimal if you do this. No. That's not, but it's like, don't forget that when you do this, this happens, right? It's a good way to do a new word. I like that. Okay, I'm going to do a check-in, guys. I may have to start using that, but, it's a great analogy for that. And it's true because I would say I have learned before, for sure, because I used to long time ago tried to help people out, not in a bad way. And I realized, it doesn't matter. And even when I'm playing with newer people who maybe aren't as gamers, we've talked about this before, I'll try a different strategy. And if I win, great. If I lose, it doesn't matter, right? I used to not be that way. I used to want to win every game. I mean, I want to win every game, but if I'm playing somebody new, I would actually rather them win the game. So I want them to walk away with a good experience. I'm not going to tank the game because that's unfair to them, but I may do some different things I wouldn't normally do. They're still within the spirit of the game. But it's easy to in games like this, because there's so many things going on, it's easy to fall down that trap. And I think doing that friendly reminder check-in of, don't forget, when you do this, you can do that. And that may spark them like, oh, that may change my mind about what I wanted to do, for sure.
Yeah. And the actions, everything happens multiple times, happens really fast. So it's not like this is something, especially in this game, where you're going to have to be like, you're doing this for, if the game plays for 30, 40 minutes, and we'll talk about length here in a minute, but, you're not doing this for 20 minutes of that. I mean, literally in the first 5 minutes, similar actions, while it's going to be one of the 5 different animals breeding, it's going to happen really fast. And I would say most often, before a loop has like come around twice, someone has like fully finished one of their habitats, which then launches things down the road. And
another good analogy there, example used, because it's even with the challenge of remembering those things, you're going to do it so much in a game, or in general, it's going to be done so much in the game that you're going to see, oh yeah, that's right. You can pull that. Oh, I saw how Jason did that. I saw how Elizabeth did that, who's more schooled on it. So even those friendly check-ins are good, but you're going to see it done so much that by the end of the game, you will have seen it and at least conceptualize it. Whether you're able to apply it yourself, you've seen it and can understand it for sure.
Yeah. So theming wise, I think what's really the theme, I'm going to completely agree with what Jason's got in the show notes. I think it's pasted on. It's not even the most iconic animals. I think that's the craziest thing to me, is that, like, I've never been to the New York Zoo, so maybe it is the most iconic animals, but we're looking at, like, when I think go to a zoo, I'm thinking lions.
Yep.
Like, guaranteed.
Gorillas.
Give me elephants. Gorillas. Yep. Gorillas would be a great one. Elephants make sense, and there is an elephant in the game. I can see flamingos.
Yeah, they're pink. They're always
because
fun.
I feel like you end up with a lot of flamingos. I don't know that I've ever gone to a zoo and been like, let me check out the wolf / dog exhibit. Meerkats, I could see. Depending on, once again, I've never been to the New York Zoo, so maybe, like we said, but like, there's some reptiles. We could throw like snakes in there, like the reptile house, and have this birds, like beyond just flamingos. So many different options. So from a theming standpoint, that's the biggest question mark to me. It's like, really, guys, these are the 5 we landed on. Penguins are in there.
Yeah.
And that's, you know what? That's a popular one.
They are popular. And kangaroos, you don't see kangaroos too often, so maybe. But to Robbie's point, it's not terrible. I mean, it doesn't like, oh, this doesn't fit at all, because within the game, it fits. You have animal enclosures, and you can only put those animals in each enclosure. So the moment you put a penguin in a single place, you can never put another animal there. So there's some relative thematics with only penguins in this space, only kangaroos in that space. But you could have done many other themes with the same concept, right? Where you're increasing the pieces you put in there, be it aliens attacking or what. I don't know. I'm just making that up. You could figure out other themes, but zoos are cute. Zoos are fun. The meeples are amazing. You have so many pieces of wood. So if you want to do a zoo building game, play Ark Nova. Big, heavy, crunchy Euro, lots of awesome, amazing actions. One of the best games ever made for sure. And BGG will tell you that. And it's you really feel like you're making a zoo. You're being a scientist. You're traveling the world to go research stuff by playing cards. And you're also putting pieces out on a board to fulfill those enclosures. But there's more restrictions on how you put those pieces out and what can be beside each other. So you want to make a zoo, go to Ark Nova. Really fun polyomino piece with really cute theme. New York Zoo.
Yeah. And like I'm literally just sitting here thinking. And in the 60 seconds that Jason just talked, I already came up with an actual reskin of this that wouldn't even feel that far-fetched. Okay, Jason? Okay. Instead of a zoo, you got to think that the board kind of looks like a truck.
Yeah.
Like it's got one little piece off to the side, and you're a painter who's going around doing a bunch of jobs. And so you're going to travel around. you're traveling around town instead of around the zoo, and you're stopping at different warehouses to pick up buckets, and then you got to get paint.
Yeah.
And once you put blue in this like bucket, you can't put red in there because then it's not blue. Yep. And the first person to have a full van ready to go paint wins. It would feel the exact same.
It would be. The gameplay could be exactly the same for sure.
I stopped at the blue store and I got more blue paint instead of I stopped at Penguins and I got more penguins. So it's fine. And I'm a big theme guy. I think I wanted to get into this one. But I don't think the theme detracts by any means. Like Jason said, it's not a distraction, and it's not even like some of the games we talked about before where it's like, oh, we just threw like Splendor. We just threw on like a medieval theme. All right, cool. Like, no, it's fine. And I think what it does shine for, and this is the positive I give for theme, and then I'll let you start game length. When we talk about, because we've already mentioned it here, that if you don't want to be a deep strategy person and you just want to have fun and build your board, the theme works really well for that because the figurines and the meeples are so unique and fun.
Yep.
I can see why we went with this versus it would be a lot harder with my paint game to get people to just want to play a bunch of buckets of paint.
Yep. Because it's fun putting out the cute little animals, even though the theme may not necessarily fully be integrated, but it doesn't detract from it. And you don't think like, this is weird. Why am I putting a kangaroo with a kangaroo? Well, it makes sense that kangaroos go with kangaroos. So as for game length, I kind of referenced it earlier. It can be a snappy game because on your turn, you only have one to 3 or 1 to 4 spots away. So you only have 3 to 4 choices based on player count. That's all you have on your turn. You don't have this wide open board with a ton of stuff. You don't have it similar to Patchwork. Patchwork, you always have one of the next 3 pieces you can play. This is based on player count. What can slow it down, and it even comes with a piece that you put. So for those who want to test out the piece on their board before finally taking it, there comes a little question mark you can put there. If someone cannot conceptualize how it looks on their board, which has happened in a game with me, and they literally tested every piece the entire game, that 45-minute game became an hour and 45 minutes, right? Because if they literally take every piece and then go back to the other one again after they've already looked at it, which, I play games to have fun, but I start losing fun when that happens in a 5-player version of that game, right? And so like I even have, and I put in our show notes that you can do a house rule where you have 30 seconds or a minute, whatever you want to call it, right, to choose it. Because it's not, the key is if you're the very next person, what that person says. So if Robbie's to my right, what he decides will affect me because he may go all the way to the 3rd spot, which is the one I wanted, or he may go 1 spot away. But you can kind of see, like, if you're all the way on the side of the board, there's no point in paying attention until it gets close to you. But once it gets close to you, you can see, okay, all right, that fits there and that fits there. Some people just can't conceptualize quickly how that piece fits on their board. Like, does it go this? I'm not great at it, but I'm very comfortable with it. And I don't need to start messing around. I can look and see, okay, let me just take that piece, right? And I play very fast in New York Zoo. I don't actually win a lot, but I don't actually lose a lot either, right? And maybe if I played slower, maybe I'd win more, maybe not. But Riders the same way. We can just do the Tetris-y, probably I'm going to look very quick to see something fits or it doesn't fit. So if you have a player who will struggle with that, it will slow the game down. But in general, that's not the case. Even most reviewers who talk about this game like it because in general, it's a quicker, because you have such limited options, not in a bad way, for what you can do, that the game cannot be a drag for sure.
Yeah. And I think that game length, like any game, I feel like most hobby games, it feels like very rarely when we play a hobby game do we talk about that the last turns get faster, because it just does. Because you're like, oh, I don't have any options. Like you think about a wingspan where those last few turns you may try to min-max points, but at that point at wingspan versus a wormspan, where wormspan I'm like, okay, I can't just run this engine multiple times. On a wingspan you're like, all right, I already know that every time I run this engine I get 6 points, so I can kind of try to see if I can find better than 6 points. Oh, I can't. Okay, I'm just gonna run the engine again. So your turns take a little longer to do things, but there's less decisions to be made. At the end of this game, there are less decisions to be made because there's just pieces that aren't going to work to fit in your board, and you're looking for, because you're trying to fill out your zoo. So you're just going to get to the end and you're going to be like, oh, that piece with 5 I don't need. I just need more of this animal, or this animal to breed so that I can get a bonus piece. And we'll talk about that in the strategy side. But yeah, I think that house rule of time being a thing, and like Jason mentioned, you can only go 3 spaces. So if we're playing a 3-player game, Jason's doing his turn. As soon as he lands somewhere, I just count 6 spaces up and I'm like, all right, any of those pieces I might have. And the only adjustment I have to make is like Elizabeth goes and she only moves 1 space. Okay, well, I did not expect that. So I now have these. I have to go to, So there's just some decisions and things like that are made, but I think it moves really, really fast.
Yep.
Strategy, it is a race, which is, I think, one of the most fun parts about this. It makes sense why the first player board is at a little bit of a disadvantage to having a larger place, because the first player could literally just get one more turn than everyone else, and it's decided there. So I like that. I like that it's filling out your board. It's very clear who's going to win, who does. Like, there is no, oh man, I'm wondering what secret hidden points they have. And I'm trying, like when we talked about Call to Adventure, when those destiny cards get flipped over, you could think you're doing really well, and the destiny card gets flipped over and they just have the perfect destiny that unlocks them like 25 points. And you're like, oh, okay, they just win. Awesome. But then there's also, like in this one, you're just keeping track of it. And so you can very easily see, even if you're someone who likes some single player solitaire, while this is single player solitaire, mostly to like in its entirety, you can still actively look to be like, oh, Jason is actually 2 squares away from being done. So I like that the clock is on type deal.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the more you play it and the more you get better at it, the more you see that. Because I've played games with my family gaming group where like, oh, I won, but like Elizabeth had 1 empty spot. She was going to win on the next turn, and Christopher's going to win on the next turn. We got to him, right? So rarely when you, among my gaming, for those of us who played it, because we played it a few times, Elizabeth and Danielle and Christopher and Mandy, no one got smoked, right? There was, because we were all kind of doing the same thing. Now, having said that, I've played it on BGA more, and I've realized there's definitely differing strategies, because my strategy was, okay, fill the board as fast as possible. And sometimes that means just taking an animal, and my breeding's not going well. And maybe I'll eventually get the breeding game going. But it's a little different depending on who I played on BGA. I've been smoked on BGA where I had like 12 spots left and they filled the board. Whoa. And I've beaten people where they had 10 spots left when I just had the correct thing going. So I didn't realize, and this is gaming in general, right? I've learned that also about Splendor. In my world of Splendor, and we may already talked about this, that we always played, it's almost like a race, okay? The bottom row gets emptied and you just get the best engine going. But hardcore Splendor players on BGA, the bottom row never empties. I've never seen the bottom row ever empty in a single game of Splendor I played on BGA, not once ever. And we always empty it, right? Like, oh wow. So they're building it up and they're buying like the 4 and 5 point cards or the 2 and 4 point cards very early. And I've only seen only a handful of games where all of the Lord's cards get taken. I'll get off my diatribe, but like when I go on BGA, I learned for games I thought I understood the strategy, I realized I didn't to actually win the game. And so it's hard to, we talked around it, we talked about it, but essentially what we didn't talk about is once you breed enough that every spot in that enclosure, so whether it's a 4 square spot or 6 square spot, once it's full of that animal, you then now get a bonus piece. You can keep one animal if you have a space for it in a storage spot on your board, but then you get a bonus piece, and there's a bunch of bonus pieces that you can now play for free that essentially are attractions in the park, whether it's a roller coaster or a food stand or whatever that may be. One of them's like a 2x4, so it covers 8 squares, so it's a big one. There's a little square, there's other pieces. So every time you complete one of your enclosures, you now get a free piece to put on your board. So do you race to totally fill out one of your enclosures and breed so that you can get that big piece? Or do you put animals in there and then you get to the point where, okay, if I have 3 kangaroos in one and 3 kangaroos in the other, I can just get a new spot and move those 2 kangaroos in there. So now I have 3 with 2 kangaroos that 2 can breed. So when you on that board, there's certain lines when you move the elephant piece to go to the next spot, it's a breeding time. So at the end of that turn, all the wolves are breed. Everybody who has at least 2 wolves in a single enclosure will breed that enclosure. If you have 2 enclosures with at least 2 wolves in each of those will breed. So now you're kind of working out the strategy. Okay, you could breed fast to try to fill up an enclosure, or breed fast and now move those wolves to another enclosure. So now you're breeding multiple faster. But you can spread yourself too thin. I've learned, okay, sometimes I'm spreading myself too thin and not letting it complete fast enough. It blew my mind because I avoided New York Zoo for a while. No specific reason I avoided on Board Game Arena. When I say BGA, Board Game Arena. But now that I play it, I'm like, oh, well. So now I'm working hard to get to the competitive level, because on Board Game Arena, there's a competitive level called the Arena, and you have to get a certain number of experience points just to even play an arena. And I think if the next game I finish second or don't lose, I will have enough points to go into the Arena. And so I can actually start playing competitive games as well. I finally got ranked. So totally side note, I'm talking too much. Space Base, I finally got ranked this past week, I'd lost so many games in Space Base, but now I'm officially ranked. But I start off 120 something, but now I'm 300th, because if you don't play, you just keep falling down. Oof. Because other points are because it's all based on experience points in there, right? So if I jumped into 125th, and if I don't play for 2 days, or I don't complete a game for 2 days, I'm now in the low 200s, and now I'm up to 3 something. And for a little while on Kingdom Builder, I was in the top 30 for a long time, because I just love Kingdom Builder. If you don't get the right things that come out, they don't come out. Let's be clear. Like, there's some strategy that I'm learning from playing other people too that I forgot about, but the right things don't come out. Anyway, okay, I'm going off. New York Zoo, I'm working my way to get to the competitive level so I can start playing better and better people to see it. But that, I don't quite have it down yet, but I love the fact that I'm learning. I thought I knew how to win New York Zoo, and I'm like, wow, there are other ways to win this game, to go to the point that if you want to get super competitive, you can start thinking ahead to those things. And I'm going to avoid this 6 square piece for that 5 square piece, because it's going to let me breed quicker, because it takes me, or it's going to let me fill up quicker, right? That 6 square piece is going to take longer to fill. And so I'm going to go and just go take this. Or I take animals a little more often, where I used to always take, if I could take a piece, an enclosure, I always took an enclosure, because it's a race. But if people are breeding better than you, they're getting more spots in their board than you are, right? Or they can breed multiple times, or they can fill up multiple enclosures on a single turn and now get a bunch of free spots. I talked way too long there, but it's to say that I got very excited to see me getting smoked on New York Zoo, but then realizing there's these other strategies. So I'm trying to learn those as I play.
Yeah. And I mean, you nailed it, right? Like, whether I fully finish a 4 spot or a 6 spot, it's not like I'm limited on which bonus tile I get to take other than what's available. So I love that idea. Yep. I think that is a really strong approach. And once again, it just shows a game with two decisions, 2 actions that you're taking has so much depth to it. So I think that it is a really, really unique game in that. I think the mechanics inside of it, for a Polyomino fan, if you are someone who you've played a Blockus and you've been looking, like, you didn't realize that there were other games like Blockus. I mean, I know that for me I always enjoyed it, but I couldn't ever, I didn't even realize inside the hobby gaming space that Polyomino was just its own thing. And I remember the exact trip that Jason and I discovered, oh wait, Robbie's a Polyomino guy. That just opens up a whole new world of games that we can play, taking us all the way up to Planet Unknown, which is going to always want to be, if not my favorite Polyomino of all time. But I love that depth. And I think that it brings a layer of repeatability to it, because there are times where you can just bank on, hey, I'm going to go for as small pieces as possible, and I'm just going to be claiming those bonus tiles over and over again. Or times where, exactly like Jason said, if people are going too heavy on the breeding, you can kind of sneak out and get those large tiles over and over again, and you only need 1 or 2 of the small tiles to sort of fill in some gaps along the way, which is I think just a really, really cool aspect on the replayability side.
Definitely. And there's so many different polyomino pieces, and they come out randomly every time, and whether you're starting player, the second player, the third player, just that alone, just the much less the strategy, making the replayability high there, you're going to get different pieces throughout it. You may recognize the piece, but the two pieces you got last game, you may never touch, and you may touch new pieces this game because of what other people are taking, right? You may think, well, I'm always going to go for the corner piece that has the stairs. Well, if it doesn't come out, or I'm going to go for the long one with the little blip. Well, if you don't get to that at the right time, you can't bank on that. But because of that, you're like, I have to go with what's there. And so each time you play that, it's the same. Whereas, and it's not a knock against Patchwork. Patchwork has the same 40 tiles in a circle, and you're going to go over them and over them and over them, right? You're going to keep going around. So in each game, though it may be different, it's the same ones that you personally will have a chance to put every one of those if you have enough buttons. For those who remember us talking about Patchwork. In New York Zoo, you may not even have a chance to get 2/3 of the tiles because it doesn't come up on your natural movement, or you don't have an animal at the time you need an animal to put that in there. Replayability is super high for this game.
Yeah. Man, just even as you're talking about, like on your natural walk through it of like, and in Patchwork, it's me and one other person. Yep. So like I can know that I really like this one piece that is high in buttons. And so I'm just like banking and holding buttons because I know that one like just works. Whereas here you're like, okay, there's that 6 piece that I really like. It's on the far side of the board, and it always seems like, because we're playing with 4 people, that it's always all the way over there, and no one else seems to be taking things off that pile, and it's just not good for me on the random chance that I'm over there to take it. It is really, really well balanced. And I will say another thing, and we've mentioned it several times, probably one of my favorite aspects of this is the fact that when it's not your turn, there's still stuff to do. You're still actively engaged in the game, which is just refreshing on so many levels, because it's very tough, I think, to play this game and get bored while you're playing it, because it's light enough that you can have conversations, but it's also, as we're talking about, there's enough layers of complexity and strategy to it that you really can be focused in. And all right, let's lock it up.
Wait, spot on. Because what I didn't highlight too is that when anyone passes the breeding section, everyone breeds, not just that person. So even in that, you're paying attention to, you could be in a 5-player game and you could breed there, and this person goes, you're going to breed again based on how far they move on the board. So staying engaged in that game the entire time is fun, even though it is a level of multiplayer solitaire, because you really can't affect anybody else other than taking the piece they wanted. But if it's on your turn, you're not hate drafting, you're literally taking the piece you need for your board to fit correctly, right? And so while it's multiplayer solitaire and you're on board, every action can possibly involve you because they may cross a breeding line. So you don't really check out, because if you're breeding, you're paying attention to the game.
Yeah. In terms of production, I think that the production and the cost kind of line up with each other pretty well. This game's going to be around $30 to $40. And I think about the quality of the cardboard pieces that you get for the polyomino pieces is really good. Yep. They're nice. I think polyomino pieces that come out a little thin can be a real drawback, because you're trying to puzzle these things together, and if they're too thin, they're sliding in top, like they're sliding underneath one another. I could see a world that someone makes a deluxe New York Zoo and that it's gridded. That would be like my only type sort of fix would be and when I say gridded, I mean that like your starting board had like a little mat that went on top of it or something. Yeah,
like a dual layer kind of pieces, thing.
Yeah, like slot in so that they don't slide around, because that can be a bummer. Like one small sneeze when you're trying to, because you're placing animals on top of the enclosures and everything. When you go to scoop your animals up, if you like scoop incorrectly, you can kind of bump everything. Yeah. If you have any OCD tendencies, that can get like real chaotic real fast for you. So. But then the meeples themselves, guys, the meeples are amazing. They are super quality. They're thick.
Yeah. And there's a ton. Like, that's just the pink ones. There's 40 maybe. The camera's not really catching that. Yeah. But there's a ton of them. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm here for it. I love this game. I think it's definitely one that like, It would be one that I think we would end up gifting to a lot of people. So before spoiling any more, Jason, you want to start us off on cookies, unless you got any other final thoughts?
No more final thoughts. I think we covered it well. Other than I look for whenever and this may influence my cookie rating, but I love Planet Unknown. I'm playing it on BGA, and New York Zoo is fantastic, but Planet Unknown's that next level up, right? So having said that, that will spoil what my Planet Unknown score be. But to me, New York Zoo is a chocolate chip cookie for sure. I love it on BGA because I get to have the fun and the feels of the puzzle. I love the puzzly nature of it and playing what comes my way. I'm only given these 3 spots. I only have one of 3 spots to take. So either take animals or take a piece. What am I going to do? I love trying to think my way around that and not having to, because I don't have to super overthink it because it's only what's going to be in front of me. I love polyomino games for sure. I love trying to figure that out. It's easy for me. If it wasn't, honestly, spoiler again, if it wasn't for Planet Unknown, this would maybe be a double doozy, but Planet Unknown's amazing. I played a lot of that on BGA. Everything about this is super cool. Like you said, if there's any production feedback you gave it is that the player boards are traditional thin cardboard, right? But they had to keep the cost down. The cost is still MSRP's $40 because of all the wood, but that's a great deal for it. So mine is a chocolate chip. What you got?
Yeah. I'm, won't hide it. I'm right there with you. I think it's a chocolate chip for me. And I think some listeners may be like, well, it's a little unfair if you're comparing your Planet Unknown. Yeah, but like,
sorry.
I can understand because I'm doing the same thing in my head, Jason, of like, as a polyomino lover, I just have to decide like what level of complexity I want to play this evening. Like if I'm thinking to myself, if I'm feeling absolutely fresh, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to put Planet Unknown down. Like, here we go. We're ready for a great evening. We've got gamers that want to go do this. But if we got gamers that want to have a good time, but also aren't necessarily looking to get bogged down and walk away from the evening. Because if you play Planet Unknown, I would be lying if I said I didn't walk out of a game of Planet Unknown with my head feeling like, okay. I just had to think a lot.
There's a lot of thinking in that one. So
because you're always getting pieces and things like that. So in New York Zoo, because of the fact that I can have a nice casual board game evening, whether they're new players or not. And another beautiful part about this is I said it when we talked about it last week or last episode, that for me, almost every time that I've played New York Zoo and introduced people to it, we play twice because they play it, they enjoy it. And they're like, can we go again? I think I've got a better grasp on, or I want to try this, whatever it may be. And this is even saying that you didn't get blown out in the first one. So it's like, okay, well, let's approach it again the second time and then maybe a different way. So I just think it's a very, very fun aspect in that. And then, of course, always if I'm like, all right, I just want to go like brain off, but put some pieces together, Blockus is always going to be at our house as well for that reason. And so there's just levels to it. And I think because of that, like I would put Blockus as a middle weight cookie and like a peanut butter. And then it just stair steps for me. Not that one is probably better than the other. I think it's just different tastes. And a chocolate chip is super, super good. I'm here for this game. I think it's wonderful. And as I was sort of teasing it in the production side, this would certainly be one that I could see if I saw a couple that I knew was like getting into gaming, New York Zoo would be like a perfect wedding present game for me. Start your collection. Here you go. You guys can just have fun with this.
Here's one. And we talk around this, and I'm glad you brought it to there because I didn't think about it, but something this is a mental note for me and verbally saying it for our show notes is we should maybe highlight what the best player count is. And by default, we usually talk about player count, but what's to your point, 2-player to 5-player, other than being a little long, other than being a little longer, like at 2-player, this game's amazing as well. Because they have different size player boards for the player count. And it's really cool how they have it set up. But like if you have a 3-player game or a 2-player game, you use different boards for your player board. So that's really cool. Didn't really think about it. Hit me like a ton of bricks. So this will be something I try to remember to add to our show notes. A little note is, what is the best player count for this? I don't know if there's a best. Like I like it at higher, but 2 is still really good. So it doesn't extend it because you're not still playing a big board. You're playing your space is still smaller, but you have access to all the tiles the same way. And then you can go further as well. I think that's in a 2-player game. You can go 4 spots away just so you have more options on your time. But be it 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, 5-player, I don't think 5-player detracts from this. Some games 5-player will absolutely detract from a game, but this one it doesn't. Even though it's not simultaneous play, it moves along enough that with it 2-player, 5-player, it's a great game. So we'll definitely add that to future discussions. And you're right, it is a great game as a starting one, because Patchwork is that basic level one. But if you want to, hey, I want to give you a game that's a little bit more, it gets you that polynomial side, but a little bit more of the crunchiness of gaming, New York Zoo is a great option.
Yeah. And I mean, you nailed it, right? Like, I think that if it's just you as a couple sitting down, like if y'all were like, hey, for Fantastic February, we can play New York Zoo. Awesome. Like that hits. Yep. It does fine at 2 players. Or if Hannah and Will want to come upstairs, you're not upset to play it at 4. Yep. Like you said, I think that is a really unique one. The player count, I've played at all player counts, and I've got fond memories at all.
Yep. I've played at every player count as well, multiple times, because I was looking through my BG stats, and I played every player count at least twice. Well, only 3-player, only once, and that was me, you, and Elizabeth. But it didn't take away anything negative. So everything else was either 2, 4, or 5. I played multiple times.
Yeah, if anything, I would argue 3 is like the weirdest player count, just because it is like you're not at the small pace of we're like zooming, but you're also not at the large pace where it's like I barely get what I'm looking for. Yeah, like it's 3, and I still think 3 is a great player count,
and it would change it up, but in good ways. It gives you different thoughts you have to work through, and different strategies because of how quickly you are not moving around the board, how quickly those pieces come available for you. So
yeah, I think we did 3 when I introduced Ryan and Abby to it. I think I think Lindsay was either out of town or she was upstairs or something. So yeah, still great. So, Jason, any final thoughts as we wrap up the episode?
I appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to talk about this one. And it was, when we texted this weekend, it was relevant because I've just started playing it on BGA. So it was fresh on my mind to talk about it. And it reminded me how much I do like this game. I have so many games that I really love that I just fall back to ones, and I forget, like I haven't played New York Zoo in I think a year, but I love New York. Like we discussed, I love New York Zoo. So it was fun.
Yeah. New York Zoo trip was, it was an expensive trip for me, because New York Zoo trip was, we did New York Zoo, dog park, and the dragons, combo dragons, Flamecraft. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a big week.
All in one trip.
That's a big week. Yeah.
And I got home and my wife was like, Robbie, why are there so many packages? And I was like, babe, we played some bangers of some games. So yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you for coming and listening to these Bards Bard. So we thank you so much. We hope you have a great week, and we will see you guys for a future episode.